Good morning, everyone. And good morning to those of you who are joining us on live feed. We apologize for the technical difficulties. Apparently, we dress rehearsed this a week in advance just to make sure it would be perfect today, but thank you to the technical team for coming up with a solution here. I'm Catherine McCabe. I'm the Commissioner of the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. I'm really excited that you all came to join us today for this important session. I'm really excited that New Jersey is getting to host it. We are kind of geographically in the middle of all of the states that are engaging in this conversation about transportation and climate. So I hope we were conveniently located. I know at least one person flew in from California, so thank you for coming that distance to join us. New Jersey as a northeast coastal state, and this is probably pretty similar to almost all of you, with the exception probably of, let me see, maybe New York and Pennsylvania. New York's coastline is a little shorter than ours. We've got almost 1,800 miles of coastline here in New Jersey. That makes us, of course, particularly vulnerable to not only rising sea levels, but other threats of, more than threats, other effects of global warming. Superstorm Sandy visited us, what was it, in 2012. So it's getting to be, you know, it's seeming like a long time now since we've had a giant storm, but every year, you know, we all just kind of hold our breath to see when the next one comes. So, and in the meantime, we have been continuing to experience a dramatic increase in the frequency, the duration, and the intensity of our storm events. And I'm sure all of you are in the same boat on that, since we share weather here in the Northeast. So we all understand very firsthand the urgent need to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And the consequences, if we fail to act, are particularly important to us and important to our session today to recognize that those consequences often fall on the most vulnerable communities among us, and we really need to focus on that. Like many other states, New Jersey has very aggressive science-based greenhouse gas reduction goals, and we have a Global Warming Response Act that was passed, I think way back in, I'm going to get the date wrong, so nobody correct me, but guess, 2006 or 7. Here in New Jersey, we gave ourselves a goal of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2050. 2006, it's right here in my notes. We have actually been doing great on that, largely because of what we've all seen with this switch of the energy sector from being coal-based heavily here in the Northeast to being natural gas-based. Still a fossil fuel, but a lot lower emissions than the coal plants. So we have, we can count that as a sort of success. We're at least on track so far. But we know that we've got a long way to go, and to get to that 2050 goal, we're going to have to reduce our emissions in New Jersey by over 2% total. No, each year. That must add up to something much bigger, yes. So much of that reduction has to come from our transportation sector. We've all been focusing, or most of us been focusing together on RGGI as one of the mechanisms that we use on the mitigation side to reduce our contribution to greenhouse gas emissions. And Governor Murphy very early on, thank goodness, committed, and we are well on our way to New Jersey rejoining RGGI after we, please excuse us, pulled out over a period of 8 years. Big mistake. We've also been moving forward on increasing solar installations, battery storage, and energy efficiency initiatives. All of this will help steer us towards our 2050 goal, but it's not enough. Probably like many of you, transportation is a huge sector of greenhouse gas emissions. In New Jersey, it's 42%. So if we don't get that addressed, then we are not going to be able to reach our goal by 2050, and I'm a new grandmother, so I take this personally, and think of our future generations that we owe this to. So these are not just aspirational goals. To me, these are goals that are really real, concrete, that we must meet. We have to figure out how to do it. So we recognize that the transportation sector is not only something we need to focus on here in New Jersey, but for climate change, but also the transportation sector is the cause and has been the cause for many years of the other more, traditional type of air pollutants that we focus on, like NOx and ozone and things that are really bad for us and our kids to breathe. And that impact falls, and we recognize that it does disproportionately, again, on some of our most vulnerable communities. Newark is a perfect example of being ground zero for that. In the ironbound community, it's ironbound by freight lines and highways and an airport and a port. And that is total ground zero for air quality impacts, and we recognize that. So this is something that is not only a challenge, but also an opportunity to look at that issue too as we address the transportation sector and what to do about it for climate change purposes. And in addition, we also recognize that our communities are, and again, often are both rural and urban, vulnerable communities don't have enough access at this point to clean, affordable, and accessible transportation. So again, a challenge, but an opportunity for us all to look at that and potential solutions for that as we go forward in our climate work. So that's why we're here today. And in designing a path forward, the Transportation and Climate Initiative states are attempting to develop a program that promotes the low or zero, hopefully, carbon transportation solution, and that meets the needs of our communities. So while New Jersey has only just recently, last year, come back to being fully engaged in TCI, we thank our brother states for having kept up the efforts of Reggie and the thinking about the Transportation and Climate Initiative during our long absence. But we are here today to listen, and it's really important that we listen because not only is must the states be engaged in this conversation, which is what has been going on largely so far, but we need to hear from our communities, and we need to gather feedback from you all, not only on the proposed design of the cap and trade system that people are thinking about, but also to listen to additional solutions and other areas for investment around the broader range of equity issues with respect to transportation. So that includes localized emission reductions, and it includes access to transportation and good jobs. So before I turn things over to our host here from the New Jersey Innovation Institute, I want to really thank all of you for taking the time and traveling whatever distance and through whatever traffic jam you had to come to get here to join us today. There are a lot of diverse voices in the room today, and they all need to be heard. And we all need to consider what everyone else is saying as we think about the possible solutions for going forward here. So for today's workshop, we've aimed to create an atmosphere where diverse voices feel comfortable expressing their views, provide an opportunity also for non-panelists to speak. We have several panels that I think will be very informative with question and answer sessions, but there will also be non-panelist opportunities to speak through the facilitated roundtable discussions. And I'm confident, I've seen this method work before, that we're going to get many diverse viewpoints coming up here, and that's what we're all here to listen to. So we all look forward to hearing about the needs of our many diverse communities and your recommendations for how we all together might proceed forward to address our need to reduce greenhouse gases, as well as pay attention to the other issues in our transportation sector that have such difficult air quality impacts on our vulnerable communities, as well as equity issues in accessibility of transportation. So it's a collaborative regional effort, and I'm really glad to see the conversation being expanded today. Really looking forward to what you all have to say. And next, I'd like to thank first and then introduce our host, Sean Vroom, from the director of the New Jersey Innovation Institute's Policy and Planning Innovation for Civil Infrastructure and Environment. Did I get that right, Sean? Yes, but this fabulous building here, which I understand used to be the gym for a high school, was it? Yeah, so they've done a fabulous job of reimagining and reusing this space, so hopefully we can all be as innovative in our thinking today as we go forward. So thank you all for joining us, and I look forward to our discussions. Sean.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to NJIT's campus. Welcome to the New Jersey Innovation Institute's Agile Strategy Lab. As the Commissioner said, my name is Sean Vroom. I am the Director of Policy and Planning Innovation for Civil Infrastructure and Environment here at the New Jersey Innovation Institute. For those of you not familiar with NJII, it's a nonprofit corporation of NJIT that serves as a catalyst for innovation and collaboration between the academic, public, and private sectors. My group that I work with focuses on civil infrastructure and environment. We are a strategic platform that aligns innovative engineers, planners, social scientists, architects with communities, government, and industry to solve complex problems. So, I will be here all day. If anybody has any further questions about NJII, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Again, welcome to NJIT and NJII, and I wish you a successful event. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean, and I will introduce our first panel, but I would also like to ask Vicki, where are you, Vicki Arroyo? Vicki, do you want to do any time adjustments in the panels? Okay, so the first panel, with that note from Vicki that try to cut it the time by 10 minutes to get us back on schedule, is an overview of TCI and why TCI is considering a cap and invest program in particular, and how is TCI considering equity as it designs that particular proposal and the investment from it. Our moderator will be Laureen Bowles, the State Director of the New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance, and she will be joined by Vicki Arroyo, the Executive Director of the Georgetown Climate Center, Marty Suberg. Marty, is he still in the room? Oh, there you are. Okay, waiting in the wings here. My fellow Commissioner, Marty Suberg from the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, and Roger Cohen, the Senior Advisor to the Secretary of the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. So thank you all for being willing to join this panel and for traveling to join us. And it's all yours, panel.
Thank you, Commissioner McCabe, and thank you, Director Froome, for hosting us here today. Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to be here to talk about advancing equity in the transportation sector. We're here because we recognize that the existing transportation system has created winners and losers. There are disproportionate social, environmental, and economic impacts. And with the added threat of climate change, we need a strategy to address the 40% of emissions that come from the transportation sector. I think there's a PowerPoint. They're going to load it for me. The way I see it is that reducing emissions is the baseline for a measure of success. Now, addressing legacy pollution, the legacy social environmental impacts, and economic impacts is where we start to approach equity, right? So addressing those disproportionate impacts is never, and I have to say again, never a bridge too far. You know, there are sometimes we can deal with certain things in policy, but we don't want to address some other things that are sometimes a little bit more difficult. But let's just admit that it's never a bridge too far when you're talking about saving someone's life, and that's what we're talking about today. Now, how do we pay for emissions reductions? What we also need to be clear about is that we've made decisions already about how we invest the money that we already have. We've deferred investment in transportation infrastructure for far too long. For the majority of my life anyway, the American Society of Engineers has always given our transportation sector a D grade, right? And so while at the same time though, we've certainly been funding subsidies in the transportation sector. So we're making decisions already about where we spend money. And as we discussed today, the mechanism by which we reduce emissions, let's not lose sight of the billions of dollars that we are already investing to maintain the status quo. And so I want to thank you for that, and I'm going to introduce the panel. First up, Vicki, you're going to come up first and speak? Yes.
Thank you, Lorene, and now I'm trying to make the clicker work. We're at an Institute for Technology, and I have to say, I don't feel as bad about Georgetown as I usually do about the technology, because it is hard to make the technology work. So I'm advancing the clicker, and it's, yeah. The pad is on here. Okay, thank you. Is there error? Okay, so really happy to be here. We have asked the panelists throughout the day to say a few words about themselves and their organizations because we didn't provide bios in the packets. And I want to start out where I began, which is in New Orleans. Growing up in Louisiana, I was very concerned about the exposure to toxic water pollution and carcinogens that my family and others in that area of the country had, which is what prompted me to study and work in these areas. And I've done that for my whole career, for my whole lifetime. I worked on reducing our toxics at the Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality and in 2 offices of EPA where I worked on both toxic and criteria air pollution. And then, like a lot of folks, made the switch in the last couple of decades to climate change, which is obviously an existential threat that we're all here to try to do our share to curb. The Georgetown Climate Center was created in 2009 at the request of state leaders who wanted more of a voice in Washington, D.C. and wanted to have a resource center that could provide them with support in their important work. And I should say we also work with cities as well, especially in our adaptation program, and we have Tiffany Ganthier from that adaptation program here with us today. But for the most part, our mitigation team, led by James Bradbury, works at the state level. And TCI is one of the many things that we've done over these 10 years with the states. Transportation is the largest and growing sector of greenhouse gas emissions in the region, as you can see from this chart. And TCI states have their own goals that they have to reach, often by law, by legislation, if not executive orders, that are very ambitious. And as you can see from the previous slide, these trajectories are not being met. So the Transportation Climate Initiative started in 2010. The states reached out and said, we would like to include our transportation agency directors in the conversations that the energy and environmental agencies have been having for some time around the power sector and figure out how to tackle emissions from this large and growing sector. It grew to include Virginia. Last year, we've got folks from Virginia in the room, so thank you, Virginia. And again, it's the state energy, environment, and transportation agency heads and their staff. Many dozens of people who've been working together to reduce energy use and greenhouse gas emissions from transportation. From 2010 on, we formed work groups for things like clean vehicles and fuels, freight movement to understand the freight flows throughout the region and what the carbon impacts might be of that and how you can maybe avoid some of those impacts. The use of information communication technologies to provide real-time data on buses and trains. What am I missing? Right, no. Sustainable communities, of course. Here we are, talking about sustainable communities. So we've had work groups that worked on many issues across the states, but in 2012, some of the states asked us to start a more regional conversation about what kind of policy mechanisms might be able to move the needle even further. And so that work began to just look around, see what other parts of the country are doing. Oregon with a VMT approach, California, for example, looking at British Columbia even, looking at a whole slew of different policies. And the states committed to work together to develop potential market-based policies around the Paris time. Now, this might have been outstripped by the reaction to the Paris Agreement, but the states that are listed here with some supporting statements from New Hampshire and Maryland did make the statement around that whole window when the world was really coming together around the Paris Agreement. Some work that supported, some analysis that supported their decision to move forward together. was this report that was done with our team and the help of Cambridge Systematics. And it found that indeed the states are not on track to meet their long-term goals, but that up to 40% regional greenhouse gas emissions are feasible. That's quite a bit more than the federal standards. And of course, the federal standards right now are in danger of being rolled back. So they provided some input to this process to just give a sense of a hypothetical investment of resources into the region and how it could really move the needle in terms of reducing carbon emissions and pollution and saving money by giving people alternatives. So that report is 2015. Ongoing work continued, and the states by 2017 made a commitment to take this conversation more public. And the states announced that they would initiate a public conversation. Many of you have been in that conversation with us. We had 2 summits in 2017 in New York and in Washington, D.C. Then we had a series of listening sessions that many of you came to. The states at the time also asked Georgetown to look at whether or not this could even be done in the transportation sector, because what we're talking about here isn't something that's really precisely been done before, and what a market-based program might look like. Where would you put the point of regulation, for example? So Drew, who's sitting up here being a timekeeper but has great expertise beyond that, helped to develop this paper that also got peer-reviewed comments and vetted by the states themselves, but it was done by Georgetown at the request of and on behalf of the states. And that paper was released when they also made the commitment to engage the public in dialogue in the listening sessions. So just briefly on the listening sessions, again, because many of you have already been at those for the last year or so with us, the goals of the regional listening sessions were to understand what some of the challenges were that people are facing, including to get to meetings like this one in transportation in our region, to outline the goals for a future low-carbon clean transportation system, and to discuss how different policies might work to achieve those goals. We had 6 listening sessions, including a pilot that we did, and we had tremendous outreach to thousands of folks, including many of you, as I said, in constituencies that hopefully have communicated to you that this was going on. We realized that we didn't get everyone, so we're appreciative of the new voices that are in the room today. But 500 people attended, and then another 100 state agency folks who rolled up their sleeves at very senior levels, like the folks you see on this panel with me today, and their staff from across the agencies, across the states, to talk to some of the participants who are listed there, trucking companies, public transit, EJ, and other equity focus groups, environmental advocates, transportation planners, MPOs who are in the room today, and more. And that we looked at these 3 questions together with the help of our expert facilitators. What would make it easier for you to transition to a low-carbon transportation choice or choices? We set out the goals by asking the question, a regional low-carbon transportation policy should, and let the tables work together to fill in those questions. And then reflecting back on those goals that each of those different listening sessions came up with, what policies or actions should be explored to accomplish the region's low-carbon transportation goals. So the groups of people at the table are represented here as working teams, and you see the number of policy sets that we got out of that process, and we collected those and took them all back in addition to what people individually wrote to us and at the table and left behind. And the policy actions that were identified most often by stakeholders is at a high level, people wanted more reliable and affordable, fair, safe, and clean transportation. And to get that, these were some of the policies that were reflected in the report outs, just like we'll do some report outs with the help of facilitator Bernice Miller-Travis later today, to sort of see what your tables are coming up with. One was to price pollution transparently and reinvest the proceeds. A lot of the other ones actually dealt with things that would cost money, including electrifying travel modes, incorporating smart growth, zoning changes, more transit-oriented development, but dealing with potential gentrification issues by incorporating affordable housing in those plans, encouraging different modes of transportation, supporting the use of alternative fuels, and improving freights and ports and other freight facilities. The whole set of listening sessions were summarized at a high level, obviously, in this summary report that's available since last fall on our website, as well as the organizations who participated. That announcement and the work that states have done with our support over the years and others in the room, thank you, led to a regional policy announcement that 10 jurisdictions made that they would work this year to design a regional low-carbon transportation policy proposal that would cap and reduce carbon emissions and allow each TCI jurisdiction to invest proceeds. And that is the discussion that we're having this year. There's a lot of other language infused in that statement, including outreach to user groups and equity considerations. And I think for that, I'd like to turn it over to Commissioner Marty Suberg to talk more about this announcement and what the states have in mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to be brief to make sure that we do have time for questions, discussions, that we make sure that we're getting the input we need to get. But first of all, I do want to thank our hosts here in the city of Newark, this fine institution, New Jersey DEP for helping us, Georgetown Climate Center, and our moderator, Lorene. I'm looking forward to spending the day really listening, because one of the things that any of us that are working on realize is that we still have a lot of work to do. We are still at the relative beginning of a process, and I'll talk about some of the tasks we're going to be undertaking, some of the opportunities for continued engagement that we will be undertaking throughout the summer and into the fall. But I did want to provide a little bit of our state perspective. Why are we here? Why are we talking about a cap and invest system? For us, we have representatives, I think, of 10 of the states here. I think that's about right. I might be off by one, but we have a pretty good cross-section of state leaders and state agency representatives here. And I'll let them speak for themselves, but I think for Massachusetts, a couple of our speakers alluded to it. We have a transportation sector that now is the largest sector of greenhouse gas emissions, over 40%. We need to do something to address those emissions, not only for the greenhouse gas impacts, but for the other impacts in terms of air quality that those emissions reflect. For us, we recognized also the value of working regionally. Again, there are a lot of assumptions to be tested. There is a system that has to be designed. But under our own Global Warming Solutions Act, our agency is encouraged to look at those market solutions. I know we've had experience with other states in terms of market solutions. As Vicki indicated, this one will be new and different from the others, but nevertheless, we can learn lessons from RGGI. We can learn lessons from how other jurisdictions have done it. Having said that, we need to be mindful of the differences. When we talk about a system like this, it's not only a system of assigning a price, it's making sure that when we assign the price, we understand its impacts, that it is truly not going to affect anybody in unanticipated ways or adverse ways that are unacceptable. We need to make sure that it is a benefit to the communities. In addition to that, Vicki talked a lot, and we will spend a lot of time talking about the equity side of the house. It's one thing to set up a system that says we are capping and reducing emissions. It's another thing to talk about what we're doing with the proceeds that are generated from it and reinvested into communities. Both are important discussions, and both are underway. So as I indicated, there's a lot to do, and it's a very aggressive task ahead of us. As you'll hear from speakers throughout the day, we're still figuring out how to do the modeling that informs our decision making. Some of our technical people will be putting on webinars in the near future to make sure we understand where are we now, so we can start modeling with the correct inputs that we will do a better job of if we're doing a good job of listening to the participants of sessions like this to move forward. How do we set caps for a region? Again, if we recognize that working regionally has advantages to working on state-by-state efforts, how do we make sure that we are modeling caps appropriately? How do we design the system, again, to make sure that it is equitable? There are systems There are discussions throughout the summer. I think there are discussions that this group will organize, and there will be discussions that we at the state levels will need to be doing. Our Undersecretary for Environment, Dan Seeger, who has joined me here today and is one of the facilitators, and his colleague Kate Fichter from our Department of Transportation in Massachusetts are working on developing a suite of meetings to make sure that we are tackling equity throughout the state and in a comprehensive and coordinated fashion throughout the summer. So we'll be working on that in addition to the fora that happen on a regional basis. So I'll end as I begin. First of all, thank you. Thank you for being here today and giving of your time. Thank you for your input. I'm looking forward to hearing the comments, the questions, the critiques, all the elements of what is needed in terms of a discussion about a major undertaking like this. And I'm very much looking forward to participating with you all today.
Thanks, Marty. Good morning. My name is Roger Cohen. I work for the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation, affectionately among our friends known as PennDOT, derisively among our other friends. I work as the senior policy advisor to the Secretary of Transportation, Leslie Richards. Secretary Richards and Pennsylvania DEP Secretary Pat McDonald asked me to share with you a little bit of context around which Pennsylvania has committed to work with our fellow TCI states from the Mid-Atlantic Northeast region toward a sustainable future for our planet. I want to say that, first of all, it's a particular personal thrill for me to be here. I am a native son of this city, came into this world over on Lyons Avenue, and spent 44 years of my life as a resident here in Essex County. In fact, when I was a boy, I used to come to this building, which was then Central High School, and watch the best high school basketball on the planet. And it's really absolutely a thrill to be here. It's not like feeling like I'm home. I am home. And I'm happy that we've gathered here together. I, as a young reporter for the Bergen Record up in Hackensack many years ago, had a conversation with a man named Saul Fenster, who was the president then of New Jersey Institute of Technology. And he had a vision for this institution and also for this city, in which all of the academic and cultural institutions that were located to the north and west of downtown would come together as what he called University Heights, a new district. And here I am decades later, and seeing that vision realized, it's pretty delightful. And it also underscores for me that we are in a long game. Things take time, but as it was said, the arc curves toward justice. And we are, in fact, at a historic moment. The world's changing. We're headed towards something new. And we, as citizens, have an opportunity both to guide its direction and to shape its form. Public opinion is at an inflection point. The climate crisis is being well recognized by a majority now, and humanity's role in it and the devastating impacts of it, including those that are already apparent, many of which are yet unknown, but it is clear to a clear, strong majority that this crisis is going to have a severe impact on the planet and on human society. This recognition has been growing, The most recent George Mason Yale Climate Survey in December, and I would hasten to add, in Connecticut, they refer to it as the Yale George Mason Climate Survey, that they found 73% of the public in the United States now recognizes the reality of global warming, and that's a 10-point increase since the survey in 2015. Only 14% now think that this isn't happening, that it is not reality. 62% recognize the human role, and extraordinarily 72% believe they will be personally affected. So we have the winds of public opinion at our back, and as we do, the 12 states here in the District of Columbia that comprise our Mid-Atlantic Northeastern region are embarked on a collaborative, deliberate, and transparent effort to advance toward a sustainable future. In doing so, we're not suggesting that we're going to solve what's a global crisis. It's going to require global solutions and strategies on many different fronts, of which this is but one. But we are committed to working together to make a positive step in that direction. And together is indeed the operative term here. Our 13 districts together represent the most populous and economically dynamic, by far, area of the United States. 72 million people, bigger than either France or the United Kingdom. Over a quarter of the national GDP, fully $5.3 trillion in regional GDP. That is practically equal to the economies of Germany and France combined. This gives you an idea of the power and of the leverage that we as a region can exert if we can find common ground and if we can move together. So, like our sister states, we call them sister states, Commissioner. Pennsylvania is moving forward. In January, Governor Wolf signed an executive order that establishes climate goals for the Commonwealth and performance goals for state agencies. Under this EO, the Commonwealth aims to achieve a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions of 26% by 2025 and 80% by 2050. And I plan to celebrate my 99th birthday in 2050, toasting that achievement. Just a couple of weeks ago, the governor released the new Pennsylvania Climate Action Plan, which identifies 19 climate mitigation and adaptation strategies, 100 action items to implement, from growing our renewable energy portfolio to laying the infrastructure for an electrified transportation system. And included in that plan, notably, is Pennsylvania's commitment to participate in the TCI process. Though I hasten to add, like all of the other states and jurisdictions, we reiterate, no final decisions have been made about TCI. But TCI embodies the proposition that we as sovereign states working collaboratively toward a common goal can make real progress meeting the climate challenge, notwithstanding the absence of federal leadership and worse. We have no illusions about the difficulty of our course. Our jurisdictions have a wide range of political viewpoints to consider, and to varying degrees, very complicated partisan alignments that can be bridged only by dialogue, marked by mutual respect, willingness to accept both give and take, and maintaining a laser focus on the common goal. Exploring these options, as Commissioner McCabe said, we must be mindful of communities, businesses, workers, geographies, residents, people who will be affected disproportionately by some of the policies we're considering. For example, much of our large rural population may not be well positioned to benefit by some of the strategies and investments we're considering, such as expansion of transit services, for example. Finally, as a representative of a Department of Transportation that has begun to have the very tough conversation with our taxpaying citizens in Pennsylvania about the need to ensure adequate fiscal resources to maintain our aging transportation infrastructure, I implore you, please be mindful that our climate solutions must support the imperative to maintain a state of good repair, actually to reach a state of good repair, of a system that is indispensable to our economic vitality. It is that economic might, after all, that is our clout and our leverage in the climate debate. It's clear to me, working together with shared purpose, we can make progress. Ultimately, the world, all of its sovereign nations, will need to come together to reach our goal of sustainability. Meanwhile, our 12 sovereign states and the Capital District are joining forces collectively to demonstrate how that kind of collaboration across boundaries, across the tribalism of political, social, and economic divides is not only possible, but is indeed the only path forward. So good luck on your work today. Thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. And most of all, thank you for your participation.
Thank you. Would you give all of our panelists a round of applause, please? Now I'm looking forward to some great questions from all of you, things that are going well, things that could go better. I'm hearing that while we start to come to ask some questions, I'm hearing that we have the political will, we have the public interest, and we have the economic leverage. So if we don't reach equity, it's barriers that we've created for ourselves. So let's see if we can reach our goal today. Are there any questions from the audience for our panelists? Were they that good? Oh, Anna, please, yes. I don't know if there's... Oh, they were in the corner.
So my question is really about process. I'm here with the New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance, and I think one of the major questions we have coming into this session is about the decision-making process of TCI and getting more clarity around what decisions actually have been made. I keep hearing that decisions haven't been made. Decisions have been made. Conversations have been happening, modeling and proposed alternatives and approaches to the transportation sector are moving forward, and those are all decisions, whether they're explicit or implicit. And so I'd like to understand better, before we start today, how is it that equity and the questions of who's most burdened and impacted by the transportation sector and who stands to benefit, how are those questions being integrated into your decision-making process? I hear that states are involved, climate modelers, transportation departments, Georgetown Climate Center, but I don't hear how communities that are on the front lines have been engaged in the decision-making process that's advancing the frameworks and discussions that you all have been having for several years now. So I'd like to better understand who is making those critical decisions about how this advances.
I'll start. I'm sure my co-panelists will have something to add. You know, in terms of how the structure works, and this was, you know, this is something that I meant to cover in my remarks. So, you know, thank you for the question. Really, when we talk about a regional approach, this really is going to have to be you know, each individual state working as a state and working collectively with other states to figure out what are the things that we need to have in common versus what are the things where individual states will make their own decisions. Georgetown is supporting us in that effort, but It is the states having this discussion with the academic support of Georgetown to help us and others. You know, we talk about modeling, and you know, I mean, as I noted in my remarks, we are looking at cap, invest, and invest, in part because agencies like ours have some experience dealing with that. When you're trying to get to a system that is reducing carbon emissions, this is a tool that we are familiar with, not only the RGGI experience, but there are other clean air programs. Again, we have the experience from other jurisdictions. Having said that, this will be a different and new kind of program. And so we are still at the beginning, as I indicated in the remarks. Our technical people are still trying to figure out, you know, how we address. Is this dying? No. Or are they? Our technical people are still trying to figure out what is the base case now, so that we can start figuring out what the scenarios are going forward. So, you know, in our effort, we have started a discussion, but we are still at the beginning in terms of, we have not set a cap yet. We're still trying to figure out how to set the cap. We are still trying to figure out what a system that has reducing greenhouse gas emissions for the region, how that would work out. What does that mean for the region? What does that mean for the individual states? And at the same time, we need to figure out what kinds of revenues we think that approach would generate. And then once we figure that out, we get it, you know, at the same time, we're also trying to figure out how are these proceeds equitably distributed. And so that is all work that is underway now and will continue for a while. And that's why it's, you know, we put such value in these types of listening sessions, to make sure that we are getting that type of input, because this will be a new program that borrows from other programs, but this will be a new program. And both in terms of figuring out how we have a declining cap and how we wisely use those proceeds, that's still work that we have to do.
Now on? Now on. Thanks. So let me clarify. When I tell you that no decision by Pennsylvania has been made, I would liken that to when President Wilson, remember him? He went to Paris for the Versailles Conference and was bound to establish the League of Nations. And in the end, the United States Senate chose not to join. And that was probably one of the great tragedies of the last century. We all have difficult paths to bring our states to the table to make this collective effort happen. And we are working, this is a work product toward developing the kind of solutions that will have the best opportunity to get to implementation and acceptance across as broad a range of the populace and the polity as possible.
I would just add, and Commissioner Suberg alluded to this, that in addition to the regional listening sessions, I know that states like his in Massachusetts, working with the Commission, New York and Rhode Island, and I just heard from folks here at Vermont yesterday, have been having conversations with their stakeholders within their states, which we encourage as well. So that's, you know, one opportunity to engage in addition to these regional sessions. We hope to have more, including one in Baltimore in July. So there'll be other opportunities to continue the conversation.
And so I can appreciate the opportunities for communities to engage, because, you know, we talked about state level you know, kind of leading the charge for us, and communities having opportunities to engage. But as we talked earlier, about keeping an open mind. And so it looks like there was a decision for cap and invest, so let's keep in mind. Something that I alluded to earlier is that the status quo, the existing transportation sector has not fared well for the disproportionate impacts. So let's keep an open mind to other opportunities. Right? Any other questions? In the back? Right? Yep.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Samuel Jordan, President of the Baltimore Transit Equity Coalition, and I want to add just a perspective to the discussion of equity in transit and pose it as a question to the panelists, but also in our work today in this conference. Everywhere in the nation, public transportation is race conflicted wherever Black people and other people of color live. This is more than just a matter of stigma. Of course, we understand that public transportation is always conflated with crime. And as a code word, sometimes a dog whistle, we've experienced in the Baltimore region the cancellation of the Red Line Light Rail project because of this association and because of this constant conflict with race and public transportation. So part of the question is, will the TCI program and policy address not only the matter of inequity in terms of quantity and in terms of options and access, but will it address this and acknowledge the fact that public transportation is race conflicted everywhere people of color live in the nation? And when we do so, we're also looking at the fact that it is often used, public transportation, as a deliberate and intentional instrument, speaking of white supremacy and control of the opportunities in communities of color, low income, and transit-dependent households. It's also something, I think, to raise attention to the fact that when we speak of equity, we're normally speaking of the communities that we know are targeted, or at least underserved, and have diminished or limited transit options. What is important, however, I believe, is that that's injurious to the entire society. In Baltimore, we don't have, I will mention this, we don't have a light rail system canceled by the governor in 2015, but as an assertive reinforcement of the race-based policy and historical segregation in Baltimore. So everybody in Baltimore will not have the enjoyment of a modern transportation system until this matter is addressed. So when it's instrumentality, everybody else in the society suffers. And I want to ask, obviously, a lot of questions and address them through the session, but I would want to know how TCI will address this question. Will we acknowledge this fact, and will we deliver this to the national community? Thank you.
It's clearly an issue that is rising in public understanding and awareness, and thank you for bringing it forward. There are, in many of our most hard-pressed communities, an absolute dearth of transit desert, even in major metropolitan centers. And if it becomes an obstacle to employment, it becomes a difficulty in accessing basic public services like healthcare, and transit systems as they exist now with their current low degree of operational funding and really scant capital resources, are hard pressed to keep operations going, much less expand. One opportunity that I know at PennDOT we're very interested in exploring and have been exploring is how for new technologies, automation, for example, micro transit solutions can help to address first-last mile problems. And I'm very interested in hearing a little bit more from you and others here about the particulars of this issue and how it actually impacts neighborhoods. So I thank you for bringing it up.
Unfortunately, we have no time. I'm hoping that we'll have some opportunities to address some other questions, because we're actually over. We thought we were going to be shorter, and we went longer. So thank you, everyone. We'll go to the next one.
Okay, good morning. So we finally avoided the rain for a day, so I'm very happy that we have such a beautiful day, and after so many, or beautiful sunny days after so many days of rain. We're lucky to have a space that has large windows letting in that sunshine, so a big thank you to New Jersey and the Innovation Institute for hosting today's workshop. This is a beautiful space, and feel lucky to have it. So I hope you're all excited about this next panel as I am. I'll introduce myself. I'm Carrie Enright Cato. I'm Director of the Office of Climate Change, Technology, and Research at the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. We have about, hopefully, an hour for this panel. We're a little behind schedule, so I'm going to keep my remarks short here. But this includes comments from the panel, 5 to 6 minutes of comments from each panelist, and a designated time for question and answer. We've asked panelists to provide comments on the process of developing a regional transportation program with specific emphasis on exploring options on how equity and EJ considerations can be accounted for in the context of a cap and invest program design, through investment of proceeds, and through other complementary policies and programs, including direct regulations, to be developed and implemented by each jurisdiction. So jumping right in, I'll quickly introduce all of our panelists, and then I'll turn the mics over to them. So we have Franz Litz, who's principal at Litz Energy Strategies, Dr. Nikki Sheets, who is the director of the Center for Urban Environment of the John S. Watson Institute for Public Policy at the Thomas Edison State University, Maria Lopez Nunez, who is Director of Environmental Justice and Community Development at Ironbound Community Corporation, Karen T. Camblin, who is the Environment and Climate Justice Committee Chair for the Virginia State Conference, AACP, and Michelle Romero, who is the National Director for Greenfall. So thank you to all of our panelists for this important dialogue. Your insights will certainly provide us with valuable context and information as our discussions progress, and on how best to design a regional model to reduce carbon emissions across the states. With that, I'll turn it over to Franz, who will kick us off by providing us with a foundational understanding of how a regional cap and invest program might work for the transportation sector, including how it might be different from other existing cap and trade programs. Great.
Okay, while they're putting up the slides. So I have a couple of objectives. One is to reacquaint everyone with Cap and Invest. What is it? How does it work? What are the key decision points in designing a Cap and Invest, so that you, as a group, can know where to make sure you speak up and get input in. And then we had the benefit of speaking as a panel on the phone in preparation, so I bolstered some of this, knowing about the issues that would come up. Then I just also want to say that this has been recorded, this presentation has been recorded, and it's on the TCI website, so if there's someone who's not here, or if you want to go back and watch it, and you can do that, because it's not, it doesn't always sink in the first time for me, that's for sure. And how do I make this, there we go. All right, so the focus is, how does Cap and Invest work? And the first question is, where are emissions in the group of sources you're going to cover by the program, and what that'll help us decide what the cap is going to be. What is the reduction pathway? How many reductions are we hoping to get from that group of sources? And then how do some of the other features in the program work, such as the auction and the invest piece. And then finally, I'll speak a little bit about linking up programs. All right. So some of you know Reggie, and if I were to point to one thing about my biography that I'd want you to know is that I was part of the New York team that led early engagement in Reggie. Reggie covers power plants, which are emission sources themselves, and so the pollutants are coming out of the stack of the power plants. And Reggie focuses right in on that point where the emissions are coming out. TCI, on the other hand, or a Cap and Invest that would cover transportation fuels, would be focused further upstream, not where the emissions are coming out, but at the fuel supplier. So we'd be looking at where the fuel is supplied in each of the jurisdictions. It's kind of an important difference, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But to start in the design of a Cap and Invest, we'd want to know how much carbon is already in that system. Let's say this year, we want to know how much carbon is coming through that fuel system into the states that would participate. That would give us a sense of how many sources we might cover by the Cap and Invest and how much carbon they're responsible for. And in this case, we are talking about fossil fuel suppliers. And the carbon, though it's embedded in fuel, we know that it's going to end up in the air. So it's an emissions program. It's just that we're focused on the carbon content of fuel instead of trying to get at tailpipe emissions from cars, which you could imagine would be kind of an impossible thing to do. So we're further upstream with this kind of a program. So once we understand where the emissions are now, or where the carbon content flowing through the system, where it is now, we can set the initial carbon budget for the region, for individual states and for the region. And that's depicted here as a bucket of tons, let's say tons of CO2, and we're going to convert those tons into allowances, and allowances are what every source must hold to cover its carbon. We're going to get to that in a minute. But so far we've talked about what would be covered, fuel suppliers. We need to figure out to start how much carbon is coming through those fuel suppliers for the region, which will in turn tell us where we're starting and where we might want to set the initial emissions cap. Okay? Once we have the initial emissions cap decided, we then want to know how quickly to make that cap go down over time to effectuate the reduction that we're after. A couple of concepts that come into play here is what would happen in the absence of the program. We know, for example, that emissions in this sector are growing, so that may not be the exact right trajectory, that red line, but we know if nothing is done, emissions are going to continue to increase most likely. And the dotted line is represented by that baseline we just talked about, the snapshot we would take about the carbon coming through the fuel suppliers. But once a cap and a rate of decline is decided, you'd be able to show it like that. It would start at a certain point and it would go down over time. So the emissions budget is something that is an annual thing. You have a certain number of tons that you allow from the covered sources in a year. We also call that the cap. And if you're designing the program and going to implement the program, then you need to figure out how to get those the number of tons you're going to allow, all those allowances represented by a pebble in the bucket, and how you distribute them into the marketplace. And that's a key part of this kind of design. In RGGI, which is also a cap and invest program that covers power plants, some of you know, most of the allowances are auctioned, and that brings in revenue, and the revenue is then invested. A couple of other options, and this is a decision point that the states will have to reach. Do you auction all of it, or do you also set aside some allowances for particular purposes? Another option, although if you were to directly allocate allowances to all of the regulated entities, that would mean there's no revenue to invest. But that is part of the design decisions. And it really matters because the government is creating something of value when they create allowances. And a lot of folks will say, all right, well, that belongs to the people, and so let's convert that to cash and decide how the revenues will benefit the people. That's typically done by an auction. So in Reggie's case, allowances are auctioned on a quarterly basis, not all of them, but some of them. And all of the entities that have obligations under the program will go to the auction and they'll buy the allowances that they need in order to in this case, sell their fuel in the marketplace. And then that gives us revenue, and that revenue can be invested. So when you hear cap and invest, the cap part is the emissions budget, and that gets smaller and smaller over time. And the invest part is what you do with the money after those allowances from the budget are sold. That was all from the perspective of the government. We decided who we're going to cover. Maybe it's fuel suppliers in the case of transportation. We figured out how much carbon is flowing through those fuel suppliers. That helped us set the initial cap, where the first cap would be. And then we talked about then needing to decide on the decline of the cap over time. That's what, and then getting those allowances out into the marketplace, probably through an auction. And that's what the government would do. So we can flip it around and say, all right, if I'm a fuel supplier, how does this work? And if I'm a fuel supplier, I have to do two things. I have to make sure that I'm measuring and monitoring and reporting the carbon content of the fuel that I'm supplying over time. So I would report that to the government agency. And then on an annual basis, or perhaps every 3 years, I would have to make sure that I had enough allowances to cover every ton of carbon I'm responsible for supplying into the marketplace. Okay? It's really, that's all they have to do. They have to measure, monitor, and report the carbon content of their fuel, and then at the end of a certain time, they have to have enough allowances to cover the carbon content that they've reported to the agencies. That's all they have to do. And the tracking system exists to allow allowances to be moved around between sources, which raises this issue of location. Where are the emissions going to happen? Does this kind of a program result in more emissions in one place and fewer emissions in another place? One of the big differences here, remember, we're covering the fuel suppliers, so we're covering the content of the fuel as it flows through the system. That's different than RGGI, where we were covering the emissions at a particular power plant, or all the power plants. So in RGGI, in theory anyway, a particular power plant could actually operate more by buying more allowances from another location. Here, you can imagine the allowances flowing between fuel suppliers, but what you're changing in that dynamic, in the trade part of this, is you're changing where the fuel is coming into the system, right? Not where the emissions are happening. Those are still happening at the car tailpipe and at the truck tailpipe. So it's a little bit different when we're thinking about locational issues. And the goal overall is, in this kind of a program, would be to improve the carbon profile of the fuels across the system, across all the states that are participating, making them lower carbon. All right, and this is it, and then I'll move on, or then I'll pass this on. The last thing I wanted to just throw out there for you to think about is linking, and Commissioner Suberg mentioned this, but TCI, just like RGGI, would end up being a group of state programs that are linked together. Every state would have its own program, and then they would be linked together to other states' programs merely by the fact that they would allow allowances created by one state to be used in another state. So allowances could leave New Jersey and go to New York, or come from New York and go to New Jersey, and be used by fuel suppliers. That's how it would be. It would be a set of linked programs. And what the states do in RGGI is they pool their resources because it doesn't make sense for every state to build the infrastructure of the program. They all got together and said, all right, let's hire somebody or use this nonprofit organization, RGGI Inc., to do all of that for us. And they share platforms. So we're really talking about individual programs that would be linked. All right, so that's it in a nutshell. We figure out which sources we're covering, fuel suppliers. We ask ourselves, how much carbon can we put on the accounts of those fuel suppliers? What are they responsible for? That tells us where we can set the cap initially. And then we say, all right, we know where the cap's set initially. How quickly can we ratchet the cap down over time? That gives us our cap trajectory. And then we have to decide how to get the allowances out there. Typically in a cap and invest, it's an auction, which generates revenue, which then can be invested in complementary programs. And then linking is a matter of each state implementing this. We heard Commissioner Suber talk about having as many states as possible, each state implementing this and then linking up their programs together. So that's it in a nutshell. Hopefully that gives us some basis to have discussions. Thank you.
First order of business is don't kill yourself getting up here. Okay, so my name is Nikki Sheets. I'm from the New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance, and I work at Thomas Edison State University, where I run a small policy center. I basically am the policy center. And I'm going to first talk about environmental justice and climate change mitigation policy in general, and then I'm going to try to bring it down to the level of TCI and end up by going from the substance to some process questions we have, and try to do all that quickly, so I'm going to talk fast. All right, so climate change policy and environmental justice. You hear me say EJ for environmental justice. One of the things that we really want from climate change mitigation policy is we want to use this policy to address a disproportionate amount of pollution in EJ neighborhoods. Right, that's one reason the EJ movement started. We have disproportionate pollution in communities of color and low-income communities, and we're going to need a lot of policies to address that, and climate change mitigation policy should be one of them. What we want from climate change mitigation policy are guaranteed emissions reductions in EJ communities. And now I'm going to show you a slide that my colleagues tease me about because I show it all the time, but I'm happy to show it again. You see it up there, and I used to drive home the point of the need for EJ communities to get reductions in disproportionate pollution. So this slide was produced by New Jersey DEP, thank you, by previous administration, and it shows a relationship that I come to call an unholy relationship between pollution and race and income in New Jersey. So it shows a relationship between cumulative impacts and race and income. For our purposes, you can think of cumulative impacts as a very, very rough estimate of the total amount of pollution in a neighborhood. And then DEP estimated the amount of cumulative impacts in every New Jersey neighborhood, and then asked the question, what's the relationship between race and income? And they graphed it. And you see the result there. Look at the top figure. As the number of people of color goes up in a neighborhood, what happens to the amount of pollution? Goes up. Look at the bottom figure. As the number of poor people in a neighborhood goes up, what happens to the amount of pollution? It goes up. Very troubling, right? What I've said all over the country, and I'll say it again, what this is providing evidence of is that if you live in New Jersey, the amount of pollution in your neighborhood is connected to what? Race and income, right? Color of your skin, the amount of money in your pocket goes against everything that we claim we stand for. And it's not just New Jersey, right? It's all over the country. And this shows why we need policies to reduce the disproportionate amount of pollution in neighborhoods. Newark is all the way to your right? I'm going to show you. Here's Newark. Newark is somewhere over here, 84% of color. Oh, thank you. Newark is somewhere over here, 84% of color. So we want to use climate change mitigation policy to address the disproportionate amount of pollution in Newark. Because if you reduce carbon dioxide emissions, you're going to reduce the coal pollutants, the other emissions emitted along with carbon dioxide that are hurting people locally. The problem from an EJ perspective, or one of the problems, is that a cap and trade, cap and invest, market-based mechanism does not guarantee emissions reductions in EJ neighborhoods. Because a cap and invest or cap and trade system will not say that you're going to get reductions from one particular plant at any particular location. And that's a problem from an EJ perspective. And so when we look at TCI, and when we see that we're starting off with a cap and invest system, right, and with a system that's going to be the framework, that framework is not going to guarantee emissions reductions in EJ communities. And that's an issue for us. And what we're being told is that, well, we're going to develop policies to address emissions reductions in EJ communities and help us do that. And that's fine, but it seems like to us that that's backwards, right? What we would have said is that let's develop the policies to reduce emissions reductions, to produce emission reductions in EJ communities first, and let's get that guaranteed, and then let's go back and let's get a framework that supports those emissions reductions from other policies and in fact delivers some emissions reductions in that very framework. So that's the first issue. Next issue. Now let me say how the substance starts to seep in the process for us, process questions. The EJ community has not made any secret that we don't like market mechanisms. We've been in the game for a while. People are probably sick of us. Some are probably sick of me. That's all right. But you know, we've been outspoken about it. So when we come into a process like this, and we did participate in some of the listening sessions, we did not think that was meaningful engagement for EJ communities. And for whatever reason, you know, we expressed dismay over a cap and investment system, and it's going forward anyway. So whether we weren't listened to or whether we were just outnumbered, what we have learned is that we could not really have significant impact so far on that process. And so to us, when we hear, okay, we got the framework, and now we're going to develop policies, what we're hearing is, we have the framework that even though that EJ communities didn't want, and we're going to get to EJ later. And put yourself in our shoes, right? So far, we've not been able to impact the process. However well-meaning the process is, and we can debate that. But so far, we've not been able to impact the process. Why should we believe, and it's delivered a system to us that we've been very vocal about that we don't like. So why should we believe that as the process going forward that we're going to have an impact on that? And that's down to the TCI level. Now bring it up to a larger level and think about this. The larger picture for us, and people have talked about it somewhat already, is that we are representing of color communities and poor communities. And I think all of us know that in the history of the United States, both a long time ago and near history, those communities have not had a lot of success impacting the process. So we're worried. And I'm going to pass it on, I think Maria is next, I'm going to pass it on to my colleague to say more. But let me just conclude by saying, and this is coming from me because we haven't had all the time we need to caucus, you know, the suggestion that I would make is that this framework does not go forward until and unless we have some policies that we're confident in will deliver emissions reductions in EJ communities. And once we get those policies that we're confident in, Then we should go back and start talking about a framework.
I won't be as scientific, right? I feel like I'm definitely the layperson on the panel. So I think that this is helpful though, right, for the states. I think you have a difficult journey ahead of you, coming 12 states together and then having to make the political case for why capping trade makes sense or cap and invest. So as a regular person, I have so many questions, right? I have questions about how this actually gets to equity. So to echo Nikki, Nikki and I were talking last night, and we were talking about how often this argument has been presented, and yet here we are still in the same place, discussing why a market-based mechanism doesn't work for people who have been left out for so long. And then we come to this room, and I try to get high school students, our future, to come and be able to sit at your tables. And yet they were put on the side because this whole process required us to RSVP ahead of time to know about this. And I think that's just a way to leave out community members, right? And I do think that it would be helpful for you to have community members present at your tables to be able to make this case in plain language, not in terms of allotments and admissions, words that regular people don't use. Because as a regular person, what I hear is a backdoor gas tax that will maybe put an additional burden on poor people when they pump their gas to subsidize rich people's electric cars and substations. That's what I hear. It might not be what you mean, but unless you have regular people part of the discussion, I think that you're missing a valuable opportunity. Two, I think that it's a big leap to expect communities that have been historically forgotten about, that today in Newark, New Jersey, we don't have clean air, clean water, access to healthy food. I could go on in the list of inequalities that exist in our city and in our neighborhood. And then you're asking us to take a leap of faith to believe in a government that has never worked for us, that they will invest money back into our communities later. So in the age of climate change, I don't think we have time for this later argument. I don't think we ever had time for this "we'll get to you later" argument, but definitely not now. If we're talking about 12 years left and all these projections keep accelerating it, and the media is going to do a great job at fueling that, like you said, a 10% increase in the public opinion. So for me, let me back up. Someone said you have the wind of public opinion at your back, right? So I want this wind of public opinion to carry you further than a cap and invest policy, a market mechanism. I want you to use your imagination to think about real regulation, something that guarantees less pollution in my neighborhood up front. I don't want to wait 5 to 10 years to see if this worked. I don't want to wait 5 to 10 years to see if the revenue generated from this scheme gets invested back into my community. And I definitely don't want to go fight our government, our state government, or our regional representatives in order to get that money invested into our communities. Also, as a regular person, I want to see the evidence, To me, this all seems like a revenue-generating scheme, cap and trade. Yet it's called the Transportation Climate Initiative. And I'm not hearing how exactly the cap will reduce emissions, or how the cap is going to help my neighborhood. As a person in a democracy, I need the case to be made to me and to be made to our high school students, to our community members, as to how this is going to benefit them. Not just tell me later you're going to get back and maybe we'll get some buses after other people have had the electric cars. Because that's a fight that I think our community is ready to have. And I know that other EJ communities are tired of this. We're just sick and tired of this. And I'm not going to put our future in the hands of a select group of people in a room where you have to RSVP to get in. And that's a bunch of academics. We need real people who live this every day. And you need to convince real people, right? Because gas taxes, even though I agree we should be using less fossil fuels, but when I'm hearing that you're going to put it on the prime supplier and they get to pass it all the way down, I don't see how that hurts them. I understand it's a decreasing model, but like other people say, there's always going to be millionaires to tax, Like Lorraine said before, decisions have already been made, legacy decisions have already been made about how money is spent, right? So how much time do I have? Am I over? I wasn't looking. Okay. You've already made decisions, so I don't think, if we need to raise revenue, I know that the states know how to do that. I think that there are better ways to do it, ways that don't hurt poor black and brown people, because we're the left out people, right? We're not really even well represented in this room, despite being in Newark, New Jersey. So I do think that we need to make this process more inclusive, and if you are going to proceed with this, you need to make the case based on the cap, not based on the investment. The investment feels like an illusion into the future, and we need reality checks here. We need admissions reductions up front, okay? So if you have to win the political opinion, this is a half measure, it's very status quo, and it's just slowly gonna decrease over time, even though we're really, really running out of time right now, okay? So I hope you get to it.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Karen Camblin. I am the Environmental and Climate Justice Committee Chair for the Virginia State Conference NAACP. But before I get into the discussion about the Transportation Climate Initiative, I just want to give a brief program of what the Environmental and Climate Justice Program is. It was started with NAACP approximately 10 years ago, once we realized all of the discriminatory and systemic barriers that were preventing the advancement and the resiliency of African American communities of color and low-income communities. And so the ECJ program was developed as a way to provide technical resources and support to communities to be part of, a participatory part of the decision-making on their local, state, and federal level. The program started in Virginia about 18 months ago, so we're kind of new, and we're working hand in hand with national and all of our local branches to combat some of these issues that are plaguing our state. There are three main objectives of this program, and it kind of falls in line with what the Transportation and Climate Initiative entails, and that is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The second thing is to advance energy efficiency and clean energy. And the third, and the most important one, is this to strengthen community resiliency and livability. And I believe that is what the purpose of the TCI program is. So I know I'm preaching to the choir, so I'm not going to go into major details. We know about the UN climate report. We know about the national report on the climate. We have either witnessed or experienced firsthand the increase in intensity of weather patterns. But I just want to keep this in mind and make sure everybody remembers that frontline communities, and these are communities that are typically African American, communities of color, low income, and other marginalized communities, have been experiencing these effects from these gas pollutants and air pollutants for decades. And so this is nothing new to us. And so as we're saying we've got 12 years to protect the planet, just imagine how these communities are. So African American communities, communities of color, and low-income communities, as you know, have been disproportionately impacted by all of these projects. Urban renewal, major transportation, highway building, you name it. Whenever there is a revitalization or redevelopment that's being done in communities, it is typically the frontline communities that are negatively impacted and who are overburdened. Yet we do not receive the benefits of these improvements, of these projects, and of these revitalization efforts. Asthma, upper respiratory infections, cancers, and all of those diseases and illnesses that are associated with air pollutants are disproportionately higher in frontline communities. Children in frontline communities experience more asthma attack, therefore having more sick days, and therefore putting them at further disadvantage in academic advancement. And the list goes on. So, despite all of these burdens, frontline communities, they have they have higher unemployment rates, less access to quality jobs, less access to higher education, less access to quality foods, typically in food deserts, less access to programs and services, and most importantly, and less access to clean environment. So while these efforts of cap and reduce carbon emissions programs such as TCI or RGGI are moving forward to try and reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, environmental justice communities, frontline communities, are still heavily burdened. These programs, wait one second. And there are a few things that needs to be addressed in order for these programs to correct the wrongs and fix all of these historical problems, remove the barriers that are preventing resiliency and advancement. And some of these things, although not all of them, but I'll list some of the main ones that these programs should address, which is an aggressive measures is needed for carbon emissions. Incrementalism has not worked, will not work. And again, these frontline communities have been heavily burdened for decades. And as we are blooming towards, climatic disasters, these frontline communities are suffering. The effort must be measurable and, most importantly, enforceable. I think incentives are a great, incentive for people for behavior changes. But these programs and policies must be enforceable. And these enforcements must come with punitive measures for inactivity or violations. Too many times we have programs where violations are recorded, but nothing happens. And bad behavior continues, despite the purpose of the programs. In addition, these plans must include the voices that you heard before of all the frontline communities. It is the frontline communities that knows what needs to be done and what needs to be addressed. Wow, a minute already. And finally, I think it should be the frontline communities that define what this program is. We need to define what frontline communities are. We need to define what the burdens are, and we need to define what the solutions are. While I do appreciate technical resources, I myself am a planner, but going out and speaking to the communities one-on-one, the mothers, the fathers, the children playing in polluted playgrounds, they're the ones that can tell you what needs to be done. And so as we look at where these fundings are supposed to be going, what we need to look at is how do we not only improve our transportation infrastructure, but how do we erase the historic barriers that these communities are being burdened with. We cannot move forward unless those systemic barriers and discriminatory practices are stopped and remedied. And so the final thing I'd like to say is I believe that the TCI program is in a great position to develop a region-wide environmental justice program. I don't believe we should leave it up to the states to make the own decision. I think there should be a minimum barrier set on a regional level. If the states want to surpass that, that's fantastic. But on a region, we need to come up with a baseline environmental justice program, as well as the criteria that's used for where the funding is going to be going to make sure it is going to environmental justice, and measurable and enforceable criteria of how the money is going to be spent. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. How are you doing? Reach up and stretch. We're talking about a lot today. I'm Michelle Romero. I'm the National Director of Green for All, which is a national program based in Oakland, California, that works on building an inclusive green economy strong enough to lift people out of poverty. Basically, we want to make sure that as we transition to a clean economy, the people who are hit first and worst by pollution and by climate change are not benefiting last and least, as my co-panelists have expressed concerns around as well. The context of my remarks is, because we only have 5 minutes, I'm going to get straight into it, is with the impression that the states have decided to pursue some type of cap and invest program, and so I'm going to be sharing what lessons we have learned about what happened in California to help inform this process to achieve as much equity as it can in the system. So in 2006, California created the Global Warming Solutions Act, and it basically set a goal for emissions reductions for the state. That led to the creation of a cap and trade program in the state. Much of that process happened most of that process happened without real meaningful input by environmental justice or equity organizations who are the most directly affected by pollution in the state. So what happened was it was not something that the community supported, and year after year after that law was passed, green groups, environmental groups, who cared about emissions reductions but didn't necessarily lead with equity, had to fight to defend that policy in the state legislature as our dirty polluters sought to attack the policy. And so it wasn't all that durable. It was something that constantly needed to be defended. In 2010, these big polluters took the fight to the ballot box because, as Ms. Lopez Nunez has outlined, the general public doesn't actually understand what in the world a cap and trade or carbon pricing program is, how that helps emissions reductions, and so they saw an opportunity to communicate to low-income consumers specifically that this is a program that will just increase your gas prices, increase your energy costs, and not do any good for you. And because the policy was largely designed without addressing the needs of these communities, frankly, they would be right. And so what I'm here today to emphasize is that in the very process of designing the policy, there needs to be very specific criteria and language put in there to make sure that it will actually lead to localized emissions reductions and benefits to the most disadvantaged communities. So just really briefly, how does this work now in California? Well, when polluters took the fight to the ballot box, again, because sometimes in the environmental community, which is a racially segregated movement, right? We have environmentalists advocate for policies that don't necessarily help environmental justice communities. They came to us because they realized that, well, while they don't necessarily see communities of color as a core constituency that must be at the table when they design the policies, that the big polluters actually saw us as our number one go-to to message, their message, right, about why this should be undone. And so they asked to work together. And so communities agreed in California to defeat that dirty energy proposition at the ballot box with the agreement that we would go back to the state legislature and work in some equity legislation basically that could address some of the concerns that we had with the existing system since it was in place and it was happening. So Senate Bill 535 was passed in 2012. Senate Bill 535 said, to the extent we're raising revenues from a cap and trade system, those revenues from polluter pockets, right, belong in polluted communities. That we have to acknowledge that the cost of pollution is not zero, and that the people who are paying that cost today are disproportionately low-income communities and communities of color in pollution-burdened neighborhoods. And so it required at least 25% of the state's cap and trade proceeds to be invested in providing net positive environmental and economic benefits to the most quote-unquote disadvantaged communities, which we then defined. The program has actually been so successful that the state recently increased the floor to 35%. So now 35% at a minimum of proceeds must be invested in underserved communities. So how are disadvantaged communities defined? We look at a map and we look at all of the different criteria, from poverty indicators to health indicators to air quality scoring and measures, even things like high school dropout rates. And so there's so many criteria that we look at to see who are the people that are most affected and have the least resources at their disposal to actually address the issues. And the top 25% of those communities are considered eligible for this Disadvantaged Communities Fund. The program funds projects that include co-benefits like jobs, air pollutant emissions reductions, travel cost savings, it looks at vehicle miles traveled, energy and fuel cost savings, water saving, soil health and conservation, climate adaptation, community engagement. So it actually does fund community engagement led projects, right? So that the community can get together and decide what it needs and develop a project for proposal. And what does all the funding mean for constituents? Well, it has meant that we've been able to create transit-oriented affordable housing development that's energy efficient and solar powered, so that one woman, Maria Zavala, a single mother, who is struggling to make ends meet, could lower her energy bill from $200 a month to $1.50 a month on average, putting $198.50, right, back in her pocket. It's meant electric van pools for farm worker communities where their incomes are tiny and their transportation costs are quite large. They're paying up to 60% of their household incomes on transportation, because to get to the nearest hospital takes 3 buses and 4 hours one way. And so it's helping people get to work, access education, access opportunities in a way that without proactive investment in these communities we wouldn't see. The other thing that I wanted to just mention is something called transformative climate communities. So transformative climate communities is a piece of legislation that said, let's take a portion of these cap and trade dollars and leverage it with private capital so that we can do truly transformative things at the neighborhood level in the top 3 disadvantaged communities in the state. And so it's doing things like energy efficient, right, affordable housing units. It's doing things like shared use mobility programs. It's doing things like energy efficiency, urban forestry, creating new parks, workforce and job training, all in the same community at the same time, so that we're changing the opportunities there. And I don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to skip ahead to one of the big challenges that still remain with this system. Does cap and trade itself actually reduce emissions? Well, yes, it absolutely does. For whom is the problem and the challenge that we face? Cap and trade as it's been designed to date, including in California, has limitations. We give away too many free allowances and we allow too many offsets. And so what happens is, in the situation where you have one community that has power plants in its neighborhood, for instance, and that polluter needs to purchase and can purchase additional allowances to continue polluting, even as others give up those allowances and clean up where they can. You have some neighborhoods that are still breathing dirtier air than others. And so what can be done about that? A separate piece of legislation, AB 617, was created to address this. It creates a community air protection program to ensure local emissions reductions in communities with the highest cumulative air pollution exposures. So this was just passed in 2016. And to Dr. Sheets' point, because it was designed from the outset without these considerations of equity, these are pieces of legislation that happened years later. And what the opportunity is before you all today is to incorporate all of this at the front end. And so that's what I hope to see happen. The Community Air Protection Program provides air monitoring and improved access to public data, among other things, to help communities be able to hold polluters accountable where they live and work with the states on mitigation measures. There are things that you can do, right? From limiting the number of diesel trucks that can come through a community on a particular day, to congestion pricing, to putting culprits on suspension from being able to trade or purchase further allowances until they demonstrate efforts to clean up their act. There are so many things that we can do. The key points here. The cap needs to be a strong cap. The point is to reduce emissions reductions. So with less than 12 years now to significantly reduce our emissions globally, states need to adopt a science-based target to really do that. Funds should accelerate the transition to a zero-emission clean energy future for all, not to backfill state budgets. If you do that, you're locking yourself into a revenue stream you're depending on. And that isn't going to incentivize you to have a strong cap or to do what you've decided in creating the Transportation and Climate Initiative was your goal in the first place, to reduce emissions. Really no free allowances. Pollution's not free, it shouldn't be free for anyone. And there need to be strict limits and criteria for offsets. A minimum percentage of funds should be invested to provide net positive environmental and economic outcomes for both underserved transit deserts and overburdened neighborhoods and pollution hotspots. Temporary funds can be maximized by matching it with private capital, as is done in the Transformative Climate Communities program. Projects and funding must be accountable to communities directly impacted by the program, and that will require funding community-led project development so that they can actually do that. And fair labor and workforce standards should be in place to ensure a living wage for employees and promote supplier diversity for contracting with women, minority, and veteran-owned businesses, focusing on a best value approach as opposed to what's the cheapest. Complementary policies, these are the last two things I'll mention and then I'll sit down. Two complementary policies I'll point out. One is when we talk about electrifying transportation, we have to still make sure then that the power that is powering those buses, cars, trucks, etc., is clean energy. And so there have to be commitments to 100% clean energy policies with an emphasis on renewable energy to accompany this program. One of the things that I saw in the presentation about how a cap and invest program would work for transportation was that unlike the power sector, the trading in a transportation only system may not actually lead to hotspots the way we see in the power sector. However, if the energy is still coming from dirty energy sources, then you can actually see increases in hotspots that way. And so there have to be commitments to clean energy. And then second is complementary policies akin to our AB 617, this community air protection program to ensure localized emissions reductions. Thank you.
Okay, so we are short on time, but I want to make sure we get some questions from the audience. So a couple of things, though, before we go to the audience. I think that we would all agree that government has not historically adequately addressed and responded to minority communities. I think that the evidence in the slides that Nikki presented, I think we should be and are aware of those and need to take that into consideration in this design. I think we all agree on the urgency of developing solutions to respond, and doing that quickly will help us all get where we need to go. And then we need to hold conversations that are inclusive. I think that's a really key point. We're trying to solve multiple objectives, and the only way to do that is to open the conversation. So to the point about the students, I think we want to make sure that there's places at the table. If you have a spot at your table that does not have anyone sitting, can you just raise your hand and let the students know? You guys don't have to move over there immediately, but look around and look for a spot. So, and then just lastly, I think that one key takeaway is how do we design a program to affect and reduce the disproportionate amount of emissions in EJ or minority communities? I'm not sure we have that solution today, but we need to address that. So I think that these conversations will be ongoing, and hopefully we can get there. But that is the question we do need to answer. So moving to questions from the audience. Okay. Thank you. Do we have a microphone to bring up? And what I'll ask with the questions from the audience, if you can keep the question brief so we can get it to as many people as possible, that would be really helpful.
I have a question and I have a comment.
Sure.
I'll begin with my comment, make it very brief. We've been working, in fact, we're here in New Jersey, and many EJ communities participated in what's called the Environmental Justice Act bill with Senator Booker in crafting that bill. And as we told Senator Booker, we are not minorities, we're people of color, okay? Number one. And we found out that's legally defensible. Number two, brings me back to process question. It is obvious based on, thank you all for your presentations, but I really have a question for Green for All, because it's obvious that you didn't have frontline communities in the process from the beginning. And what I mean by that is, was mothers from East LA with you? Did they share their experience about cap and trade in the early iterations? Did they talk about the asthma? And then just very quickly, it is equally obvious and disturbing as we talk about equity that we've had a subsequent number of meetings and sessions, but yet today, what number meeting is this? Today is when we say today is the important day that we're going to start, but it's already started. So it's obvious that if there were questions and assumptions and when this eloquent gentleman back here lifted the information of race, then it's obvious that there were not only community members, there weren't even technical advisors with cultural competency to be part of this process. So we want to know, where were the community members, where were folks like Dr. Sheets and others with cultural competency to be included at the very beginning and not today? How did that process?
Do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for asking the question about Green for All, because I think I should clarify something. Green for All was not involved in SB 535 or the cap and trade program in California. Yes, and I'll get to that. I just wanted to, because you asked the question, use the opportunity to share who was. So the Green Lining Institute, Asian Pacific Environmental Network, which is an environmental justice organization in California, Coalition for Clean Air, and Public Advocates. So just to give credit to the people who actually led that effort in California. Here today, so folks can attest, we did reach out to Dr. Sheets, and we did reach out to many organizations last year when we were actually called in and said, hey, there's not a lot of equity going on, there's not a lot of people of color or environmental justice or equity organizations at the table, what can we do? And we took some time first to just come in and figure out what is going on, what is the Transportation Climate Initiative, a lot like folks are doing now. And several organizations are in this room who we have brought together to know about this, to understand this, and to come advocate their own interests. And so I just wanted to uplift some of them in the room. Pittsburghers for Public Transit, the Baltimore Transit Baltimore Transit Equity Coalition, yes, over here, Samuel Jordan. Kamita, sorry, I'm looking at you, and I was trying to think the same thing. The BTB Coalition in Brandywine, Karen here from NAACP in Virginia, and also Mari, who's here from the NAACP in New York. Did I miss anyone? Great. And so there are a handful of organizations we've brought together. We organized 25 groups in Philadelphia to have a conversation about what do y'all want to see? Here's what's out there, and have been engaging with the Georgetown Climate Law Center. Several of the people we've been working with are not able to be in this room, as you know, right? There are limitations around when people can travel for an event, but have been involved in a policy working group to develop a set of principles for TCI.
And if I may, just so everyone knows, EJ communities, frontline communities, we don't usually need a power broker like Greenfall. You can usually reach out to us directly, like our state of New Jersey has. We can have conversations. We often already have relationships with state officials, and we definitely don't need in between. Because I think when we try to do that middle management type of thing with communities, that's when it's really upsetting, it's condescending. And quite frankly, we have scientists that we trust, we have lawyers that we trust. Communities have had to fight for their rights and their self-determination for so long that we've learned how to talk to bureaucrats, right? And bureaucrats are people too, and we can sit down at the table together and have conversations. So when in doubt, you can just talk to your local communities directly. And that's what I feel comfortable saying as frontline communities, that's what we request, that you let us speak for ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think that each state should and is recognizing that each state and each community is unique and different, and we need to be connecting with those folks in our communities as we move forward.
I guess I should say something, since my name has been invoked several times. I did feel by the time that I was reached out to by Green for All, it was late in the process, and that the process at that point, our perception was that EJ communities had been excluded to a significant degree, and we were having concerns at that point. And so that's why, we're bringing those concerns here now.
Oh, thank you.
And trying to figure out since we did feel like we were excluded early on, and a system has been handed to us now that we don't agree with, how do we go forward now and make sure that doesn't happen again?
And I know you guys have been in really direct conversations with the state of New Jersey, and I hope that we, everyone is at the table to work together. So I think that's a good model for other states to take back, and recognizing that New Jersey has really allowed for a space to have a conversation.
And there are moving pieces to the process that is more than just TCI. Right? There are various actors in the process that we don't understand the official connection to TCI, environmental groups like Green for All. And to us, it's almost like an opaque community of folks working on this, on the project that involves the states and various actors, and that we feel we haven't been connected to yet in the correct way.
We can take one more question and then we'll move to a break. How about right here in the front?
Dr. Sheets and Mr. Liz, thank you guys so much. From a pragmatic point of view, I was thinking about this a lot when I was working in California and now that I'm working here. Can you talk about some of the root causes of the pollution in these disproportionately impacted communities? For instance, California recently found that 40% of GHG emissions come from 5% of the cars in the entire state, which really puts a bullseye in those communities. And those are the people that are precisely too poor to maintain or replace their cars. Are there other root causes you can talk about, like proximity to highways, downwind pollution, proximity to factories, ports, etc.? Just to kind of seed everyone's minds when we talk about what we want to address and what we want to focus on today, the rest of our discussions.
So you pretty much named them all there.
Yes.
Right, you got the transportation in, you got the power plants in. I might add one more. I might add, especially New Jersey, chemical plants. And I think to take it beyond the greenhouse, let me just say for a minute, take it beyond the greenhouse gas setting. We really worry about the diesel pollution, which is also a greenhouse gas agent. But that's also hurting people directly. And one thing I want to mention in New Jersey too is that we also worry about, from a cumulative impacts perspective, we also worry about multiple sources of small pollution. So how do you get those under control? Because when you aggregate them, they might be a lot of pollution, especially in the urban area. Maybe the best example people always use are like dry cleaners. But you might have chop shops. You might have, I'm looking to the ironbound folks, right? You might, Maria's saying fat rendering plants, a whole lot of things. And that's why the concept of cumulative impacts is so important, because we get in a situation where there's so much pollution, say in Newark, that no one source of pollution seems like it's a lot, even when it's a big pollution source. And folks will say, oh, that's all right, because it's not a large part of the problem. When you aggregate everything, there's a big problem.
Okay, I'm going to have to cut off.
I just wanted to add to that.
I'll just say that we'll cut the break a little bit short, because I do think it's a good conversation, but we will need to cut the break shorter.
Okay, I'll be really quick. I just wanted to point out that frontline communities it's a two-part definition, right? It's a socioeconomic description, African American, low-income communities of color, but also it's the typically communities that do not have or lack political support and political protection. And so you typically have a concentration of these polluting facilities in these communities, because the municipalities or regulatory or whomever are not protecting these communities, right? So the transaction costs to put these facilities in these communities are typically lower, and the ability to influence permitting process, approval processes and that are higher. And so that's one of the reasons why these facilities are typically in the frontline communities. The comprehensive plans, the building codes, the land use codes, all of those things that are in place to prevent these things do not work in frontline communities. And so when I'm saying, like with the TCI program, what we need to do is not only look at improvements, but how do we remove those systemic issues that prevent these communities from being viable and resilient. Until we address those systemic and institutional and discriminatory practices, our frontline communities will continue to be ignored and vulnerable.
Great, thank you. So we're going to move to break. It will be 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes. Stand up, shake out the wiggles, grab a drink, go to the bathroom, come back to your tables, and we'll move on to the next session where we'll have dialogue at tables. Thank you. Thank you to the panelists.
We have a grand total of 6 of these. There is one more. I think they had laptops, I think. Me too.
This morning, it's been a wild time.
Because we were talking about 6 seats at table 6. So your kids were
Yeah, so I would love to talk. It's just been a wild week. I haven't really been back. We were working on this agenda too. So it was kind of wild.
from Richmond.
Yeah, you got it?
Yeah, I did. I saw you in the corner. I was like, man, maybe I should be
We can try.
I can do a brief though. I think it's a good way to get public transit funding. Reduce contribution. And I feel like once we get people on transit,
No, for sure. So I'm definitely going to it's just I haven't been able to get back to for this session because it's been such a whirlwind to try to get to today. But after today, I know after today, there's more speakers, so then we can have more speakers. Okay, and I'll definitely get all of it.
Thank you.
feels like. I know it's too short. If you could please try to make your way back to your seats so we can get started again. Please, everyone, have a seat. Sorry the break is so short, but we do need to get started again to try to stay on track here. And for those who may not have a table assignment, if you would like to join the table, please find an empty seat and feel free to join the tables. After this next panel, we will have roundtable discussions, and so we'd like for everyone who came today to have a chance to participate in those discussions and fill out the worksheets and register your thoughts with us. Great, thank you. Thank you, everyone. So that's what a 5-minute break feels like. Sorry, I know, it's very short. So our next panel is going to be led and moderated by Andy Swords, the Director of the Division of Statewide Planning in the New Jersey Department of Transportation, and he'll introduce the panel and get us started. For those who are just coming back from restroom breaks, please do fill in the empty seats at the tables so everyone is welcome to be a part of this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah? Good. Well, once again, welcome to Newark. I just want to say on behalf of Commissioner Diane Gutierrez-Scacchetti, our Commissioner of Department of Transportation, I'm just happy to welcome everyone to this event and to our panel. So I just want to mention part of what our commissioner's focus is what she calls commitment to communities. And what's happening in our department is every aspect of our department, we are looking at ways that we can better serve communities. So today's forum is a perfect example of that. So speaking of communities, as we know, and as we've discussed so far today, there are many communities that have to deal with the challenge of being disproportionately impacted by pollution, and many are also underserved by not being able to have sustainable and cost-effective transportation. So, and a lot of times, many of these are the same communities that are doubly impacted. Okay, sorry about that. I did not intend to wake everyone up in that fashion, so I apologize. And I also want to mention, I want to also echo what Samuel Jordan mentioned earlier, is that it's easy to think of these impacts as only being borne by these communities, and they are, but the effects of it affect all of us, and that we are all part of the same large community where we have to all work together to deal with these issues. So I'm just very happy today to have a panel of experts to discuss these issues, because these are people who have dealt with these impacts firsthand. And so we have a very diverse panel here. Right now, we're supposed to actually have 5, but I only see 3. So we'll start with who we have. And if some of there's 4, I'm sorry. One of my other problems, as I've gotten older, my vision is not as good as it used to be, so thank you. 4 out of 5 is pretty good. So, having said that, I want to say we have our folks who are with us today. To my immediate left is Kim Gaddy, from Environmental Justice Organizer with Clean Water Action. To her left I believe Nicole? No? I'm sorry. We have not met, I've not even met all these folks yet, I'm sorry. Oh, Renee Reynolds, yes. Renee Reynolds from a transportation planner for the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance. We also have Joanne Troutman, President and CEO of the Greater Susquehanna Valley United Way. And in addition, we also have Corinne Taylor from We Act. She's been working on, she has been involved in work for environmental justice at the national level. And then we also have Nicole Scott Harris, Education Coordinator and Organizer for the New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance. So rather than listen to me anymore, let me pass it on and let's start with Kim. Thank you.
Thank you, and welcome to my city. As was stated, I'm Kim Gaddy, Environmental Justice Organizer for Clean Water Action. And indeed, it is great to be here and to be a part of this conversation. Because when we talk about individuals who live in frontline communities and who suffer from the disproportionate pollution on a daily basis, we have to have a seat at the table. But more importantly, we need to know why we sit at the table and what we bring. And so as we begin to look towards the solutions, that's what I'm going to focus on. I guess I'll get this clicker right. No? Okay. So this is the mission of Clean Water Action. We bring together diverse constituencies to work cooperatively for changes that improve the lives with a focus on health, consumer, environmental, and community problems. We have been in existence for over 40 years. We are the state's largest environmental organization, and we've been working in the city of Newark for 18 years, and specifically around ports. And so I want to kind of give you a snapshot into my reality. I'm a fourth-generation Newarker. I live in the South Ward of the city of Newark, which is one of the communities that is adjacent to the port. The Port of New York and New Jersey has trucks anywhere from 18,000 to 20,000 trucks that come in and out of that port on a daily basis, spewing their dirty diesel fumes into our community. I'm a mother of 3, and all 3 of my children are asthmatic. And I know that is because of the pollution that we disproportionately suffer from on a daily basis. Out of those 18,000 trucks that come through this port, around 3,000 to 4,500 stay on the roads of the South Ward and the ironbound of the city of Newark. And it is time that we begin to have an honest conversation about the port that is the economic engine for the region, but it's the death zone for individuals who live in Newark, Elizabeth, Jersey City, Bayonne, right? We suffer from the impacts of this port. And when we talk about what is happening and the things that we can do, we can easily change this situation. You know, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey had the opportunity to establish a truck ban. And when it was time for that truck ban to come into existence, they reneged. And we talked about people having the political will, right, to do what is right. Port Authority of New Jersey can change this situation today, but they chose not to. So we find when we begin to look at what happened, and I'm kind of going to just go over some quick data real quick. So we find that the fine particulate matter, PM 2.5 emissions, concentrations, and the risk from total mortality will be higher with the rollback clean truck program. Specifically, the increased emissions from 2017 and 2018 alone will result in the following changes. And this was based on this study that we did as members of the Coalition for Healthy Port. Truck PM 2.5 emissions will be higher by 7 to 8-fold each year. Port trucks emit fine particulate matter at the port terminals, and while moving to and from the port via routes throughout our region, there will be 11 times more PM 2.5 emissions from port terminals under the Rollback Clean Truck Program in 2017 and 2018 when compared to the original program. Right? So we got to understand what that means. I talked about just me as a parent and having 3 children who are asthmatic. And now we're talking about not removing the older, dirtier trucks off the roads because of financial decision or political decisions that somebody else made without having the real input from the community. When we also talk about the PM 2.5 concentrations, they will increase by up to 1 microgram per cubic meter in some areas. This means that in the annual mean 24-hour PM 2.5 concentrations will increase by 1 in 2017 and 2018, several areas as a result of the rollback program. And so what we have to do is we have to do better. This is unacceptable, right? We are continually putting the risk of individuals and frontline communities in danger. And then this last one is just startling. The risk of death due to a year's emissions will increase by over 1 in a million in many areas and by over 25 in a million in some areas. So that means that the 2017, the risk of all-cause premature mortality are expected to be higher under the revised Clean Truck Program for adults in the study area that they would have been under the more stringent original Clean Truck Program. Now, this is a picture of the concentrations of the PM 2.5 of Port Authority of New York and New Jersey the truck ban rollback. And if you see, right, this is Freeland Heights and Avenue where I reside. This is our park. This is Elizabeth. This is our port. And you can see here what this means and the high levels that we are exposed to on a daily basis. This is a picture of industry versus the residents. This is on Freeland Heights and Avenue. The tan is the people in the houses. All right, so this is housing. This is the most densely populated area in the Dayton Street neighborhood where we have 10 senior citizen high-rise facilities, 2 public housing townhouse facilities that house over 3,500 of the poorest individuals in the city of Newark. Right here. The gray that you see, and we have another map on the other side, is the industry in the ports. And in this one stretch of Freeland Heights and Avenue, we also have 2 halfway houses for children and 1 federal halfway house on the same block. So when we talk about solutions, we need zero emission zones now. We need to begin to establish these zero emission zones in port adjacent communities. All deliveries should be made with electric vehicles. We need warehousing restrictions, mandate residential buffers, use of electric vehicles, trucks, and plug-ins. The master plan for the city of Newark and the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey must be inclusive with community benefits agreements that mandate zero emission zones and the use of only EV trucks and equipment. We must reestablish that truck ban for pre-210 engine models at the ports of New York and New Jersey through the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey tariff. They have the ability. And we heard some folks talk about funding. We must prioritize the funding for implementation of zero emission zones and electrification of our port complex and drayage trucks utilized in nearby port adjacent environmental justice communities. And that is my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Next, we have Joanne Troutman, President and CEO of Greater Susquehanna Valley United Way. And Joanne's going to describe some of the issues and concerns in the central part of Pennsylvania. Thank you, Joanne.
Thanks for having me here. I can assure you that this is not usually how I spend my day, but I'm really pleased to be here. Greater Susquehanna Valley is the central part of Pennsylvania. So my friends in Harrisburg who are here today will tell you they're central Pennsylvania, and they're lying because we are. We're about an hour north of Harrisburg, a fairly rural area. Our United Way covers 3 counties, Northumberland, Snyder, Union counties. We're a population of about 200,000. And our area is really very interesting. Snyder and Union counties generally tend to have a poverty rate overall that is lower than the state average. We've got a couple of college towns, Susquehanna University, Bucknell University, sort of economies that are thriving. But we do have pockets of poverty in those communities. They tend to be centered around low-income, unsubsidized housing or very, very rural communities. And then we have Northumberland County. It's the largest. It's actually about the size of the other 2 combined, 100,000 people. And the southeastern portion of that county is coal country. I am from there. I am a coal miner's daughter. It's been very interesting. That's an area that we just recently have taken on through merger of another United Way. And so when you look at poverty rates in Northumberland County, the further south you go, it's almost like a gradient. The further south, the higher the poverty rate. Closer to coal country, the higher the poverty rate. So it is pretty interesting. The challenges facing our community are sort of all interlaced. I would say number 1 is the mental health challenge, especially among young adults, teenagers and young adults. People in rural communities are about 1.8 times more likely to commit suicide due to a variety of factors, including isolation. The second item, and I would say again very interlaced with mental health, is substance use disorder. We are the community convener around issues related to substance use disorder, and initially it was heroin, but what we're seeing now is meth use laced with fentanyl, and that's where we're seeing our deaths, again much higher in Northumberland County and the poverty-stricken areas in our community. I would say number 3 is lack of transportation. Transportation and lack of public transit has come up on every community needs assessment that we have ever done. The transportation and access to vehicles tends to mirror the poverty rate in our communities. So in the city of Sunbury, for example, where our office is located, about 1 in 5 people do not have access to transportation. So it's pretty staggering. And then access to healthcare. All of this kind of rolls up into workforce development issues. Again, they're all pretty interlaced. So where we're at with transportation, again, we've been talking about lack of transportation for about 20 years, and we're in the process, and we're closer than we've ever been to developing a fixed route initiative. It has been a public-private partnership. There are community members at the table. And what we're evaluating is how we do it responsibly and sustainably. So we're looking at compressed natural gas buses, about 4 of them running. The plan is 6 days a week, about 14 hours a day. We're recognizing that it won't solve all of our issues, though. When we're looking at how rural some of our communities are, we recognize that last mile issue, and for us sometimes it's the last 9 miles, is a real problem. And so we're thinking about everything from revolving car loan programs, which we currently have at United Way, to bike share. Bike share is not going to work for some portions of our community, in part because of safety. We do have one rail trail in our community that's beautiful. It connects 2 communities, but we're looking at bike share as a possibility of being a resource to sort of the cities and the population centers in our community. We face a lot of barriers, and at the risk of getting political, I will say that our barriers are political in nature. The number 1 issue that we face actually is not financing, dollars, although it's related to dollars, in that there are a number of community leaders who do not feel transportation is an issue. They are in denial, despite the fact that it continues to come up on our community needs assessments over and over and over again. They feel government should not be responsible or involved in public transit. They feel we have enough, and their philosophy is those people who want to work have access to a car. And so it's really kind of disturbing to me. These are the same people I talk to about the fact that rural homelessness is a problem, despite the fact that you do not see people sleeping on benches. It doesn't work that way here. And so education has been our ongoing challenge, our ongoing barrier. And finally, dollars are an issue, and some of that is related to how dollars decision making gets done at the state level, and that's what we're trying to work through now with PennDOT, trying to figure out how to really work on solving this problem and making it sustainable. One final plug: if you don't have United Way at your table, I highly recommend you do, especially in rural communities. We are the collective impact voice and the voice for vulnerable populations and many other communities that are resource stars, so I highly recommend connecting with your local United Way. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. Next on our panel, we have Nicole Scott Harris, Education Coordinator and Organizer for the New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance. Nicole has been, among other things, coordinating environmental justice leadership training, and she is part of the Coalition for Healthy Ports for New York and New Jersey. Thank you, Nicole.
Good afternoon. So we talked a little bit about these parallels between RGGI, or the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, and TCI, the Transportation Climate Initiative. Obviously, there's some regional overlap, even though it's not exactly the same. And New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance's position also has been previously articulated on the stage, so I won't get into it too much, but just to say that we want mandatory emissions reductions at the communities that are demonstrated to be the most vulnerable and pollution burdened. And that's integral to the policy framework in terms of our measure of success. You can, obviously, we've already talked about this, but you can mandate reductions, but if you don't mandate them at the communities that are most vulnerable. And I also want to make this case that if a community is pollution burdened, we are in an ecosystem, right? This is an ecological ecosystem. So if you have these outliers of communities that are creating destabilizing ecological conditions, that is creating an overall imbalance that makes everybody's community vulnerable. So when we focus on Newark or Jersey City or these particular areas that are termed urban, we need to recognize that this has ecological impacts for everybody, not just every ecological system, because all of these systems are interplay, but human beings as part of the ecosystem. So let me see that. So when we talk about environmental justice, I'm glad I'm going after, I'm glad I'm going after, it's just habitual. I'm glad I'm going after the woman from Pennsylvania who's talking about rural communities, because I think a lot of times environmental justice, to be classified as environmental justice community, can be conceived of as a stigma. Even if a person does live in an environmental justice community, they may not want to associate themselves with that terminology, maybe because it might compromise what people think about their town, their property values, whatever. But environmental justice communities very much include low-income communities, and more classes become a marker for significant social and policy outcomes within the United States. So I think it's important that we drill down that beyond certain income levels, people of color are considered to be disproportionately exposed to these areas or live in these areas that are burdened and cited with these type of facilities. But this is not an issue just about people of color. This is firmly rooted in a poor people's issue or a working class issue, a working poor issue. And so that's important to note. You'll see on this graphic here that it says 95% of the claims filed by these communities as far as environmental claims are denied by the EPA. I just want to also flag that this was published in 2016, so this is pre-current administration. So we should keep that in mind. And grounding this in the state of New Jersey, New Jersey has several issues, several issues in terms of things that we need to be improving on equity across the board, incarceration, education, and anything you can name, we have issues. But this is a snapshot of our environmental quality, and this is for everybody in New Jersey. So this is the American Lung Association's report card from 2018. Most of the state has an F, where there's monitoring available. Global sea level rise is perceived to be, so one of the reasons why these opportunity zones in these different areas like Newark are being so, getting such a spotlight on it is largely part due to the riverfront. And I think that we are not really considering, as we're doing this abundance of investment in riverfronts, what the real implication of global sea level rise is. But I guess developers don't want to talk about things that are not convenient to discuss. And so we need to really seriously think about that. And this just shows some of the various different things that we're dealing with in New Jersey as far as environmental challenges and why there is a heightened sense of urgency, as Maria said previously, about this needing to be done now, emissions reductions now, zero emissions now, to repeat what Kim said. And lastly, I just wanted to conclude with this slide, which Jason Mathers from the Environmental Defense Fund was kind enough to send me 2 days ago, which I got while I was attending an Energy Foundation Transportation Electrification Advocates meeting in March of this year. And I didn't even know that this is current technology. This is existing technology. This is existing technology for electric vehicles and their existing mile ranges. And I think it's important, I used to work in government, I was congressional aide, I did a couple of other things, that we recognize that government is not generally, historically, a institute of revolution or progress. Government only really does what it's pressured to do. And so we don't look to government for the most forward-thinking things. And by the time a government initiative is probably taking place, it probably really should have started 20 years ago because of the bureaucracy that keeps people entrenched in the status quo type position. So I say that to say that if this conversation started in 2010 around TCI, the framework is outdated. And we need to really consider what the existing technology is, what the emerging technologies are. And there's also a report that says by the end of 2021, drayage trucks are expected or projected to be significantly a lot more accessible as far as range and cost. So that's all I want to end on, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Nicole. Appreciate you connecting a lot of these issues and how they go across many different areas, many different settings. And also I appreciate your points about how the technology is out there. I'm going to follow now with Renee Reynolds from the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance. And thank you for coming today.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for having me. I'm a last-minute add-on to the schedule, so I'm not on your programs. I'm here on behalf of the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance, and happy to, hop across the river and just share a little bit context from our side. I'm going to talk a little bit about NEJA, some of the major transportation campaigns that we manage, and how we have been engaged or involved in the TCI process so far, and some of the major concerns that we've flagged. So the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance is a membership network of organizations across 4 of the 5 boroughs in New York. We link grassroots organizations in their struggle against environmental burdens. So whether it's our campaigns to reduce the amount of waste haulers in our communities, or reducing the impacts from our public transportation system, we are fighting at various fronts to support our communities. So as the transportation planner, I push forward two of our major efforts. One is the push to transition our public bus fleet to all electric by 2040. We have been advocating for the MTA, who has publicly committed that they're going to make this transition, to actually put forward a solid plan, something that indicates how their procurement schedule is going to roll out to meet those goals, and how they will be focusing on those communities that are most overburdened by the impacts of pollution coming from those buses. We know that in New York City, the overwhelming majority of users of public transportation are from communities of color. We represent 75% of bus ridership and 66% of subway ridership. And we have also been in the historic fight for congestion pricing and successfully passed the first congestion pricing plan in the United States. Thank you, and that has been a decade-long fight. And so when we first heard about the TCI process a little bit over a year ago, we kind of had a few concerns. One, we didn't want to see a cap and trade remake of RGGI for the transportation system. We flagged that a while ago and said that we were concerned that the emissions that were driven down were more from the transition to natural gas than they were from the RGGI program. We flagged that the cost per ton that was placed on emissions was pretty moderate to low, and we didn't think that we were going to see those deep impacts if we reimagine this program for transportation. We also flagged that we were concerned that this program would undermine a broader climate policy that we have in the works right now, the Climate and Community Protection Act, and its companion bill, the Climate and Community Investment Act. And we see these two bills as an economy-wide approach to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and something that we think should not be undermined or supplanted by the TCI process. So integration is a very important thing to think about. And I also just want to echo what has been said on the previous panel about equity. That was another huge concern of ours, in that this conversation has been happening for almost 10 years now, and last year was the first time that we were invited to the table. And so, equity is not something that happens at the tail end of the program. It's something that has to be baked in at the beginning. It's something that has to reflect the knowledge that resides within communities, and you've seen and heard that from the various panels. So those are some of the major critiques that we have had so far in this process. In order to sort of emphasize that a little bit more, we developed a set of principles. One set of principles came from our work in the Electrify NY Coalition. We presented those principles to the TCI facilitators. We attended the listening sessions, and I think we were a little bit underwhelmed with the representation from communities. We know that there are a lot of stakeholders that were missing from those conversations, and we keep having the same process occurring because those folks are not at the table in terms of orchestrating what this looks like. Someone talked about having folks, that have cultural competency at the table when deciding what these sessions look like. And so I hope that there are lessons being learned and that are going to be pushed forward as this continues. I'm out of time already? That was 5 minutes? Jesus, I talk slow. And I just want to flag also that we are also a member of a larger national network, the Climate Justice Alliance. We flagged for the Climate Justice Alliance that we need to be engaged, or at least heard as part of this process. And the Climate Justice Alliance also put together a set of principles emphasizing that TCI needs to be aware of the existing programs and policies and frameworks that are being built in frontline communities by frontline communities for frontline communities, and so that we are not, conflicting with those efforts. Both of those documents are in play, so you can have an opportunity to look at it. As far as I'm concerned right now, we are also asking to pump the brakes, to take a step back. One of the things we flagged in the beginning was that we didn't want to see cap and trade. We were told that this wasn't going to be a cap and trade, but we know that there's a trading mechanism embedded in the program that we're currently working with right now. So I think I'll end there and just move on. Oh, I'm over time. I didn't even know there was a red sign.
Thank you, Renee. I appreciate you coming at the last minute and sharing your concerns. That's great. And last but not least, we have Corrine Taylor. I'm glad she was able to make it as well. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Excited to be here on behalf of We Act for Environmental Justice. We are an environmental justice organization that was founded in Harlem, New York 31 years ago. We are fortunate to also have one of our co-founders here today, Ms. Bernice Miller-Travis. Hi, Bernice. She's in the back. She's a facilitator for today. What I wanted to share was, in addition to our work directly in Harlem, We Act has had a very long, extensive experience in making sure that communities of color engage not only in the creation of environmental health policies and procedures, but has used transportation sector as an opportunity to make sure that our communities can have access to clean air. And so I'm going to show just some general statistics on what's happening in Harlem, or what has been happening, and then also show some clear examples of how community engagement and meaningful engagement of those communities can benefit those communities and New York City and regions overall. So there are, in Harlem and Manhattan, 5 out of 7 of the MTA Manhattan bus depots are located in Harlem. So that's 71% or whatever that number is, but that speaks to the fact that communities of color have been the sacrifice zones for wealthier communities in Manhattan specifically, but we know that's also the case nationally. So if you have 5 out of 7 bus depots in one neighborhood, in Harlem being a smaller part of Manhattan, that means that community is not only exposed to to diesel buses coming in and out and exposing those young children, senior citizens, vulnerable populations, et cetera, to bad air quality, but then where they're also getting exposed to particulate matters and things of that nature. So We Act's work in the 90s particularly was to address this disparity and this burden of pollution that this community was experiencing. And this data just speaks to the air quality right now in Harlem. The zip codes that make up our We Act community is some of the most overburdened communities with asthma, and East Harlem, which also is comprised in our community as well, not only has some of the worst cases of asthma in the city, but also in the country. This data was taken from the New York City Environmental Health Data Portal, and it just compares ER visits for children, et cetera, for what's happening currently in Harlem, and then as it relates to New York City in general and Manhattan overall. And in all cases, Harlem's exposure to asthma rates is incredibly high, and it's the worst in comparison to New York City and Manhattan. In addition, the health burdens that our communities are experiencing in Harlem is also worse in comparison to Manhattan and in New York City. And again, not only is that in direct correlation to the access to transportation routes in and out of Harlem, the bridges, et cetera, but we want to pay particular attention to the fact that, again, 5 out of 7 bus depots are in the Harlem area. So again, that's a large amount of pollution coming in and out because of these buses. Now, I wanted to show, this is a quick diagram of WEAC's work in the transportation sector, specifically in empowering the communities to not only force their way in many cases to be at the table, but for the communities themselves that are most impacted to have the ability to articulate the solutions, the problems, and what they believe needs to happen for their benefit. So specifically, we had a Dump Dirty Diesel campaign that launched in 1997. Through that work, we were able to identify not only through some EPA research that the air quality standards that were in Harlem at that time were 200% higher than proposed EPA standards. So again, another clear example of environmental justice communities having worse air qualities than the rest of the city, but not having access to the decision-making processes to really speak to how they can improve those communities. Through really strong community, wow, 2 minutes. Through strong community engagement, we had a number of successes, but just from this chart, they took time. And one of the biggest complaints sometimes from bigger greens and even from government officials and organizations is that, you know, things in EJ communities take time, but they need to take time. We need to have the, what we have done and what we try to consistently do at WEACT is educate and bring our community members up to speed. And also in doing that, we have to realize that not everyone can be at a meeting that's at 11 o'clock in the afternoon. We have to set up our meetings to be accessible for that community. So it may be an evening meeting. I know we have our monthly membership meetings on Saturdays. And so that's our way of educating and engaging communities at a time that's most accessible for them. And there have been many cases, in spite of our desire to engage, that we've had to sue New York State, New York City, et cetera. We filed a Title VI complaint in 2000 against the U.S. Department of Transportation, charging that MTA was in violation of the civil rights of the Northern Manhattan residents. And the response from that claim, DOT concluded that the MTA must give due consideration to environmental justice principles in setting decisions. So that's another thing that we've been able to develop, is a strong expertise around the legal steps that are required, whether it's the Civil Rights Act, Title VI, just whatever types of litigation, whether it's NEPA, et cetera, making sure that our communities not only gain the information, but have a growing expertise to defend and to advocate for themselves. But one thing we've consistently seen, that as we can participate in those processes, we can make real change that will have long-standing impacts for our communities. I'm gonna jump ahead because I don't really have time. It's down. But one thing we were able to do, one outcome of a coalition and community-led effort to clean up MTA transit fleet in 2000, where we worked with the city and the state to eliminate dirty diesel and to create the world's cleanest transit fleet. We, in coalition, 300 compressed natural gas buses were added, 250 hybrid electric fleets were added to the new bus depot bus offerings in the city. I'm going to show another example. One thing that we're incredibly proud of is the Mother Claire Hill Bus Depot that just opened in 2014. But that process itself took a very long time. But through concerted efforts with the Mother Claire community, we have now a very state-of-the-art bus depot. And these are some examples of how that bus depot, through community engagement, through WEACT and other partners coming to the table and articulating what we would want to see in a bus depot and how that would impact our communities, we were able to get, this depot is LEED certified. It incorporated the best available technologies on all emission resources. It prioritized assignment of hybrid electric buses to the depot, and it had sufficient indoor parking to house the entire bus fleet. It also prioritized local, minority, and woman-owned businesses and local hire and training. And I think that's a very important part that we sometimes tend to neglect when we think about projects for environmental justice communities, in terms of how not only does it impact the community from an environmental perspective, but also from an economic development opportunity as well. We've also worked with the city to work to clean buses for New York City. A lot of the city buses, the school buses, not only were diesel, but they also idled in communities, and the idling of buses also increases emissions. And with children being on those buses, that increased their access or their them being exposed to not only dirty emissions, but increasing their asthma rates as well. And so I don't have much time, but I just wanted to show again, these are 3 clear examples that when communities are empowered to not only talk about their issues, but also provide clear examples of what they would prefer to be the solutions, we can make real change that will not only benefit the community, but what we know and understand too is the byproduct of a lot of the work that WEAC has done and a lot of environmental justice has done, in a weird way, has driven more real estate development. So that's another concern that we have to think about when we bring communities to the table and we empower them. How do we make sure that they can stay in the communities that they've now cleaned up, that they, in some cases, aren't able to enjoy because of increased rents and things of that nature. So please stay connected with us, and we look forward to talking to you all more today. Thank you.
Thank you, Corinne. Appreciate it. How about a round of applause for the whole panel? Do we have time for a couple of questions? No. Okay. I do want to point out, though, we are leading directly into a panel a facilitated table discussion that will be addressing a lot of these issues that were brought up. So there will be plenty of opportunity for people to raise concerns, add some additional thoughts, so look forward to that. Right now, it is my pleasure to introduce Bernice Miller-Travis, who has many years of experience, as we have heard, in environmental justice and engaging communities. Thank you, Bernice.
Thank you. Another hand for that extraordinary panel. So I just want to tweak a couple of things that Corinne said. Those 5 of 7 municipal bus depots are in northern Manhattan, Harlem, Washington Heights, and Inwood communities that all share demographics, share impacts. The exposure to diesel particulates, we found we had the highest rate of premature death of any community in the United States from asthma. Any community in the United States, and the rate of premature death was so high in Harlem and in northern Manhattan that it drove the national average for incidence of asthma and asthma mortality in the United States of America. So dealing with transportation impacts is critical to people's lives, people's longevity, people's ability to be healthy and be whole, children to be able to grow up and thrive. So the conversation and the comments that you hear people talking about, they're just giving you snippets of what the everyday reality is of the lived experience of folks for bad transportation planning. Nobody has mentioned this yet. Hopefully it'll come up in the conversations on the table, but you cannot go forward and build a new imagined transportation equity regional process without addressing the fundamental inequities that transportation planning created in the first place. It destroyed communities. It maimed people. It hurt people. It wiped communities off the face of the earth, right? Right here where we're standing, right? New Jersey Institute of Technology, which used to be the Newark College of Engineering, when it became New Jersey Institute of Technology, to create the parking that they imagined for all the people who were going to use that facility, they tore down hundreds of homes of Black and Latino homeowners who lived right here in this community where you're standing. My husband went to this high school, which used to be Central High School. I used to tell him he graduated before I was born, but that's a whole nother conversation. But this was a thriving community. It's a great looking place, but what you're missing are the people who used to live here. Transportation planning has destroyed people's lives. It's one of the biggest things that we talk about in the EJ arena because the impacts have been so devastating to us. And so, when you think about what the future is going to be, when you have this conversation about the Transportation Climate Initiative, you can't just go forward without acknowledging not only what's happened in the past, but you have to correct those errors, right? So you can't build a new foundation on a faulty, contaminated piece of land, right? You got to clean that up, and then you move forward. So nobody said that yet, and I just thought I'd throw that out. So Moving forward, we are way behind schedule. So we're half an hour behind schedule. What we're going to do is ask everybody to come and get your lunch, bring it back to your assigned tables, and then we're going to have facilitated conversation, and the questions are already on the table. I'm going to be walking around capturing that. Everything you say is going to go into the summary of this meeting, and hopefully it's going to shape and hopefully maybe, reshape the trajectory going forward, because y'all have put some powerful stuff on the table. Thank you. Enjoy your lunch.